was never a dull day of rounds, like, the day you rounded and found that one side of the transfixion pins were connected with bars and the other side with duct tape, right?
I hear apocryphal stories about you going down to the morgue to prepare.
It was also the biggest mistake in my academic career. It wasn't sure if I was a serial killer or a surgeon when he got this note, because I had zero self-control. The largest principal problem that we have is the loss of a patient-based approach. I haven't missed a workout in over 30-something years. It will, I hope, completely revolutionize resident education. That's very eloquent.
Yeah, I'd like that on my gravestone, please. Pete, when we first started this crazy OrthoHub journey about a year ago, we spoke about some of our dream guests and who we'd love to chat on the podcast.
Yeah, we did.
We've been really fortunate. We've had some amazing guests. We've been incredibly grateful to them for supporting us. I remember saying at the beginning that I wonder if Mo Bandari would ever do it, just so I could talk to him about rap and hip hop music. And you said Paul Tornetta was on your bucket list.
I said Paul Tornetta, he would be the king of guests.
And here we are. We've peaked. Folks, this may well be the last ever podcast that we do. It's like the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We've had our Iron Man, we've had our Thor, we've definitely had our very own Black Widow, all the way from Russia. Our Guardians of the Galaxy. Pete, this is where you're supposed to jump in and
What
say,
am I supposed to say?
You're supposed to say on your left.
I'm on your left.
Because I'm Captain America in this analogy.
Got it.
And we've built to this our very own OrthoHub endgame. And today we take on our very own Thanos, but in a good way. Maybe he's the anti-Thanos, if you will, because our guest today wants to make the universe a healthy, better place. Our guest today is Paul Tornetta III. He breathes that rarefied air of orthopedic royalty, and he is truly a Hall of Famer. We asked people for their opinions, and they said, here are a couple of quotes. He's quite simply the greatest orthopedic trauma surgeon in the world.
You'll never guess who said that.
Yeah. That's clearly from someone who's never seen me K-wire a wrist. His driving principle is logic and honesty, never money. And that's clearly from someone who's never met a sports surgeon. And he always speaks the truth, and a lot of people don't like that. He's known by his initials as PT3, but like JFK, LBJ, and FDR, except none of those losers had a number in their name. Pete, I always do the bio, but given that it's the actual real-life Paul Tornetta here, I think you should do the honours for once.
Yeah, well, when you landed on this, my heart rate raced a bit. So I'm going to do the bio. For everyone's information, Paul was really against this. Oh God, do I really have to sit through this again? And we have to do it. So here's the bio. I'll try and make it as quick and perfunctory as possible, but it is impressive. Chief and Chair, Professor and Residency Program Director, Department of Surgery at Boston, Director of Orthopaedic Trauma at Boston Medical Center, Maths and Chemistry at Franklin and Marshall College, studied medicine, intern and residency at Brooklyn, fellowship in acetabular and pelvic fractures under the legendary Joel Matter. He's done a huge name in research, and that's an understatement. Exec committees of Sprint, Faith, Trust, Flow. He leads the Orthopaedic Trauma Research Consortium, executive committee on the METRC Consortium, over 250 peer-reviewed publications. He's faculty on a bunch of things, but he's basically the guy who develops the programs himself. He runs the fellows course, just finished that, editor of Rockwood and Green, innovator, not just research, but surgical techniques and implants, past president OTA, ABC fellow, incoming chair of the Council of Education, AAOS, OTA icon on a recent podcast series. That's well worth a listen. Answers the phone as Tornetta, but the residents call him PT3. Allegedly, and you can confirm or refute these, allegedly never missed a day of work in the last 30 years. Famously requires no sleep whatsoever. Loves candy and sweets. Sugar junkie like Cash. And that's like the single and lonely point of comparison, I would say.
And that's all we've got in common. But look, you don't get a body like this overnight, Pete.
The only thing missing from that is the Order of Canada. But I'm not sure you're eligible for that.
Yeah, I actually, when I see Mo next, I'm stealing his. So
you snuck out with a medal.
You got to have one. You got to have one.
Paul's probably got a couple of Purple Hearts or something, so it's fine.
Paul, very warm welcome indeed. And we're genuinely honoured and delighted to have your time today. Thank you so much.
No, it's my pleasure to be here. You guys are doing a great job.
Can we? We don't want to overlap too much with the OTA podcast, but can we start with your training? What was it like being a resident back in Brooklyn? What was it like?
Yeah, it was It was, well, dramatically different than what it is now. And I would say in good and bad ways, right? So we had, when I was training, if you were PGY4, PGY5, you had independent operating privileges at the city hospital. So it didn't require an attending to even come to the hospital for you to do a case at night.
Right.
Toward the end of my training, it became necessary that you had to let someone know. And then I think in my chief year, then someone had to actually show up, so you could see the volume just drifting down and down each year, just down of the nighttime cases. But when I was training, it was residents training residents with some backup support from staff, and I can tell you my first, we talked a little bit about mentorship. My first mentor was Stefan Kottmeyer, who's a close friend, today. I talk to him a couple times a week, but he was a PGY5 when I was a PGY2. And we bonded over the fact that, we were both in the most horrible possible way, perfectionists. And I wanted to learn everything, and I wanted to be at the hospital all the time. And that wasn't hard to find him because he was there all the time. And, we bonded, and he taught me a tremendous amount about patient first care, professionalism, and really the drive to be the best, right? Because if you don't have that, you're not going to get anywhere. But that same paradigm, while it was great for me, when you went into that program, you came out really prepared or completely broken. There were only two options.
That's what I was going to say, is that this was clearly, for someone exceptional like yourself, that was awesome. But it was, I guess others, suffered under that.
It was hard. It was great in the end when and I enjoyed it thoroughly. And I had some great mentors, Stan Gordon, who was my chair, couldn't possibly care more about people. And I got a lot of things from him. Steve Shesker, who's a foot and ankle surgeon, actually would cover me to do pelvis fractures. And, a guy named Reggie Manning, who was our sports guy. We had a lot of really talented people who really did a great job, but it was still at the county hospital more of a free-for-all at that point. So we saw some very interesting things like rounds. There was never a dull day of rounds, like, the day you rounded and found that one side of the transfixion pins were connected with bars and the other side with duct tape. That's an actual finding on the floor, right? So, there was no lack of interesting things to be seen.
That's innovation, Paul.
It was innovation. It didn't work. But, now they do it in the spine. They put rubber bands in, right? So, that's probably the same guy. But it was really, not a patient first environment, because if you happen to get people who are interested in great, you got a good outcome, but you could get someone who wasn't ready to do what they were having to do. And that just didn't necessarily go well. So while I think it was wonderful for training, it was definitely not the best paradigm. What we do now is far, far safer. It's probably not as much fun for the residents, but it's far, far safer and better for patients.
But I imagine then from what you're describing, it was very much a sink or swim scenario there.
No, it really was. We had 16 bed wards with the bathroom down the hall. And, it was just a very different environment than anything you would see now. We had our own equipment. We ran our own x-ray. When I was an intern, I teamed up with a good buddy of mine whose name was Ron Tutron. He's a urologic surgeon, so he didn't quite see the light, or he saw the wrong light.
he's on this circle of light.
But, Tutron, Tornetta, we were both sort of cocky Italian guys, and we ended up taking call together as interns. We would just go around together and do all the pre-ops and wheel the x-ray machine, take our own chest x-rays. In those days, you had to draw your own blood, label your own blood tubes, bring it to the blood bank, go pick up the results. It was a very different environment. And I think that the problem with that was that the workload was so great, it was hard for people to then put in the time reading that some of us did. So it was a sink or swim, and people definitely came out of those programs. And, granted, not all programs were like that one. That was a very city-based program. But, you came out really ready and prepared. I mean, by the time I did my fellowship, I had done 40 acetabular fractures on my own.
Wow. Just
reading the book with no faculty who had ever really, trained in it or done it. So you're really on your own quite a bit.
Yeah. And it's interesting that when you talk about training, actually, the first person you went to was a PGY5. It was like someone 3 years ahead of you. That was your training. It was kind of like knowledge gets passed down the bus rather than it comes from the attendings.
The near peer mentor.
Yeah.
Right. Right. I mean, when I got to be, I think it was a PGY 3 or 4, one of the old residents named Mark Bergman came back, and Mark actually had a real interest in the patients at that hospital, and he would show up. But he was really the first one who regularly came to the OR with us, in a very consistent manner. It was very interesting.
Do you remember at the time thinking this just doesn't feel right, or was it just this is how it is?
No, it was much more the latter than the former. I mean, I had done medical school there, so it's what I saw. I was not a kid with any money. I was a lone kid and, scholarship kid in college. I didn't come from money. No one in my family went to college, let alone medical school. So I saw nothing of medicine until I was, in medical school. And then that's the situation I saw, right? That was what we saw, and that was completely normal to me. What I saw more than anything else was the opportunity to do good, right? It was, I felt even by the time I was a 2 or 3, I felt full responsibility for the patient at that time in my life. And that changes the way you prepare for things substantially.
Yeah.
And I think that part of it was really good. Like, if we can impart that onto the educational paradigm we have now, we'd be in great shape.
But you're right, though, because trainees now, and we will go on to talk about this later on, is that having that buffer of the attending above you in terms of responsibility between you and the patient, it does distance you somewhat, doesn't it? Whereas I guess you had it, it was you and the patient, and you're about to do the operation, and you're the only one seeing them post-op, and that's all they're going to get.
Right. Right. It definitely puts a buffer. Now, I'll say, I mean, I have some unbelievably great residents. Like, we have a wonderful training program, and very few over the history of our program, very few real weak links. But they can't feel the same thing that we felt, because you just can't make yourself. It's like saying, well, I'd like to be in love today. You are or you're not, right? You can't. It's not an option to pick it, right? And you're either responsible or you're not, and you can't pick that either. So they don't feel that until probably into their fellowship year, and even then, sometimes after that.
I hear apocryphal stories about you going down to the morgue to prepare, and how true is that?
Yeah, so that's true. We had an interesting. So there's a guy named Tom Hare who is he's a very bright guy, spine surgeon, did some tremendous work early on in instant axis of motion, and was one of the first people to do CD rods in the U.S. He's really interested in spine biomechanics. Had a biomechanics degree. He used to teach at one of the schools in Brooklyn. That was he used to teach biomechanics. So he had a bunch of residents that would do projects with him, and he had this deal with the Kings County morgue. Basically, they would use unclaimed bodies, and they would harvest the spines, and they would do biomechanical testing on them. When I found that out, and there were medical students and residents doing this stuff, and they did a lot of great work. And when I found that out, I realized that this is a great opportunity for me. So I sort of got permission to go down there whenever I wanted, and I think that usually entailed about a fifth of something to give to the guy who was down there, which was sort of the payment for getting in the door. But it's sort of sad, but at the same time, from an educational standpoint, quite good. So at that time, if someone died and they were unclaimed for 30 days, they basically became city property. So they had to be buried in, a city morgue, and they had to dispose of the bodies in that way. But that period between 30 days and when they were taken to their eventual gravesite, you could go and do anatomic dissections and do things on those bodies. And, I'd say it's, there were moldy bodies, and, it's 30 days in a refrigerator. It wasn't like you were dealing with fresh frozen cadavers. And it always felt a little sad to go there, because, just the fact that these folks had nobody, and but they were contributing, and, we always treated those things with the utmost of respect, which I think is important. But it did provide, really good material for us to do things in a resource poor environment. A lot of the studies I did were actually my early studies on anatomy and sort of portals and things like that were done on those cadavers. That's what we had available. So I would go down at all hours of the night and do dissections and prepare. Like, my first ileoinguinal approach I did on my own, I did 3 cadavers. Before that, the first 2 wouldn't have survived an actual surgery, I don't think. But that third one, I had it down.
You smashed it.
Femoral artery was fine. But yeah, we had a great opportunity down there. It was very interesting.
One of the things that you're known for a lot of things, but one of the things you're best known for is the semi-extended nailing, the suprapatellar nailing. That was certainly the first way I came across you. Must have been an academy 10 years ago or so. Firstly, why would you do that? Why would you violate the PFJ?
Cash is a knee surgeon, by the way. Just prepare you for that.
Yeah.
A nauseating knee surgeon.
I protect it while I'm using it, right? Just to be clear. I'm nice with it. When in full extension, you're not a nice guy. Yeah. So I can tell you where it happened. I was a chief resident. I was in the OR with a case, and I was on my own with a junior resident. So this guy had a 3B tibia and a femur, and in those days we used the chick table. You remember the old chick tables? There's this big overhead rack, so they'd have a post and a top to the table, and then the things that pulled on the leg came from the top down.
Okay, I've seen that. We'll find a photo and put it in here.
Yeah, it's fantastic. My partner in Boston, I think he took our old chick table and has it in his garage because he couldn't part with it. But it was a great device, and you could do anything with it. But so you had femoral traction, we had distal femoral traction. In those days we didn't have retrograde nails yet, so we did an antegrade nail, and the patient was doing really crappy. So we had IND'd, we did the femur, and I had to do the tibia. And normally you would change the table out for a completely different table with a post and a setup. And I just didn't feel I had the time to do that, but I didn't want to leave this thing unstabilized. So I just opened his knee, said, I bet I can do this under the patella. And I did a medial arthrotomy, and I put the nail in. And I said, wow, that was really easy. It was fantastic. And then I went to the morgue, and I did, my first thought actually was, wow, if I can just work under the patella, this is great. So the first thing I did was actually the suprapatellar. And I couldn't make that work because, first off, 30-day-old cadavers don't have a lot of compliance. Yeah. So you'd bend your things would start. Yeah. So that didn't work. But even so, when I would take it out, you could see that if you were really extended, your portal, your all was aiming too posterior. Yeah. Right. And to flex enough to be on the trochlear groove without hurting it and go in parallel with the anterior part of the tibia, you needed probably about 25 degrees of flexion. Yeah. So then I started doing these mini arthrotomies. And that's how it started. I was doing it for proximal and distal fractures, but still doing, a flex knee poke hole technique for sort of mid shafts. And then we finally looked at that because I was worried they might have more knee pain. I wasn't sure they didn't. So we kept prospective track of that. And it really turned out they didn't have more knee pain. So now we use it a lot more often. I tell you, it was also the biggest mistake in my academic career was the picture in that article. The picture in that article, you could do a distal femoral replacement through that picture, right? So it was huge. And I've only ever made like a 4 or 5 centimeter incision. That's all I've ever done. Like I have pictures from 25 years ago when I was doing them, way back then. There were only these little incisions, and I'd use that as a window to make an arthrotomy. But the artist, when I went to him, I said, I want to show this. He said, well, let's just move the skin so we can see it. So they moved the skin out of the way and showed like the underneath incision. And the article came out and people were exactly like you, Cash, like,
what are you doing?
Like, just do the total knee now, right? Yeah. Like, why wait?
You've got the exposure.
And nobody really was too excited about this technique because of that one tactical error. It took another 15 years
to undo it.
Anywhere I gave a talk, I would show it and people would start to do it. But then, it took another 15 years for people to say, well, let's just make it a small incision. Oh, well, that sounds like a good idea.
But the thing I'm intrigued, the thing I'm intrigued by is, the first time you did it, it's not a thing that people do at the time. It wasn't a known thing. The attendings the next day, did anyone ever say to you, what the hell are you doing? That's crazy.
Yeah, so I was the PGY5 and there were no attendings in the room. And, I got along quite well with my PGY5 colleagues who would have been the only people who would have criticized me. And everybody went, well, geez, that's pretty interesting. How'd you do that? Right. So it was much more around,
fascination rather than.
Why would you ever do that? Why would you ever do that? And then, well, how did it work? Tell me about it. And that's the attitude I think most of us had. So there was no criticism because really it was an unknown until I was attending and we had collected cases and published it.
No, it's been fantastic. I mean, I've seen it change over my career. We used to do it with the knee really flexed. I have to stand on a stool to go all the way down and get the reach. Now I use semi-extended nailing all the time, and I love it. So thank you. But how long before the specialist? How long before the specialist kit turned up for it?
So I designed a kit actually with Stryker, but they didn't believe it would sell because I designed a T2 nail before I moved to Smith & Nephew and designed their stuff. So that was when I was first in Boston. So like 98, I had a prototype set, I think in 98. But it just didn't catch on until Roy went super patella, right? And then people liked the idea. I'm not sure why. it's simpler. It's sort of easy to do. It seems slick. And that's when, the instrumentation became more readily available. But we had sets back in '98, and then I had an early set before suprapatellar nailing I was using. Because the big problem at that time was you would subluxate the patella, but when you put the reamer in, you had to not scrape the trochlea, right? Everything you had to do. And all the jigs that were, the connection of the jig to the nail wasn't smooth, so that couldn't touch the trochlea. So I had custom stuff back in '96 to '8, I think, and then a new set in '98 of smooth jigs and jigs that were smooth at their intersection with the nail, and they didn't have marks on them. Also, that could work on the trochlea safely.
Yeah. And then, of course, that has become engineered further and further. So now you get into that, that sort of like the very, very small changes being made to kits and stuff. This is a sort of broader point away from suprapatellar. How do you think that we as a specialty have we become slightly dependent upon specialist kit and pre-contour plates, and trauma's become very, very easy is the wrong word, but easy to go into autopilot, should we say, with some of the specialist kit we have?
So first of all, I think we are dependent on it, but I think that's the right thing, right? So, if you talk to the people who have really developed interesting things in all areas of medicine, and you ask them, is my opinion, but if you ask them, where have you made the most impact, right? Is it a surgical approach paper? Is it a randomized trial? Is it, the thousands of patients you treated, the people you've trained? I think for me, it's the equipment that we've made that makes surgery better across the board for surgeons around the world. Like, that's your biggest impact, right? You can do a great study that changes and, okay, we're going to ream or not ream, we'll do this or that. But most of these studies don't show dramatic changes. But if you can make a kit that can make a surgeon in a resource poor area, or any surgeon in a community that doesn't have a trauma surgeon, be able to manage something much better, your impact is global. It's that and education. Those are the two things that make the biggest difference and impact the most patients. So I think it's a good thing. I don't particularly like things that are brought out really with the dollar sign as the incentive. I think that to do something, you should have a specific goal and a reason for improving something. Unfortunately, I think, our stuff runs the same way as cars. It's a 5 to 7 year cycle, and people want to see something new. I still use, like you guys probably do, a sliding hip screw for more than half of my hips. It happens to work really well. I've still had 0 failures in my career with that device, and just the fact that there's other stuff that's more expensive doesn't make it better. So I think it's a matter of, as a surgeon, balancing what your goals are for the patient against the evidence. And I don't think we should be really contradicting the evidence too often. But you need to innovate, and to innovate, you have to be without evidence. So it's a conundrum.
Agreed.
But it is fascinating what you're saying about the impact, because the fact is, something that you've come up with over there is benefiting our patients over here in the UK and globally. So that must make you feel pretty warm inside.
It does. If why did you go into medicine? You didn't go into medicine to make what? You don't do sports, do you? Anybody do?
I do sports.
He totally does. That's all he does.
Yeah. All right. Well, so I'm not going to talk. So this is not for you.
I did trauma also.
Most of us go into medicine because we had some influence in our lives that made us want to help. Right. Ideally, that's why you're in this field. Right. For me, it was seeing my mom be ill when I was younger and like feeling powerless about that, and being good at science. Like, those two things together said, well, what does that add up to? Like, help people, science. Well, maybe being a doctor would be a good idea. And I think most of us still have that. Right. There are people that go off the path. And are just scoping for dollars. Don't take it personally if it's not you, but we know it is you.
That's got to stay in. That's got to stay in.
Yeah, right. I don't get to edit, right? You guys get to cut this out.
I'm getting absolutely slammed.
See what's going to happen to me. A lot of things put together, No, but I think it does. It is. You're trying to make things better, and when you start, I think it's very appropriate that you're just trying to make your one patient better, right? Because everything that you do should always boil down to the patient. If the only thing that drives you in your life as a doctor is the patient, you will be incredibly successful. Whether you're a designer, whether you simply take great care of patients every day in your practice, but you're going to feel great at the end of every day. And at the end of your career, look back and you'll see all the good that you've done, because it all comes down to that. And I think that's the way I was as a resident. And when I first started doing things, all I wanted to do was be the best at what I was doing so that no one could get better care somewhere else, right? That was my initial goal. And I'm sure that, I'm close, but, there's always people better, right? There's always people better than all of us. But as long as you're up there where you're doing things that no one in your area can do better, like you're doing the right thing. And then at some point you realize, well, gee, this product could be better, right? That's how I got into design. I made a whole bunch of complaints. I kept calling the rep and saying, why can't I do this? Why can't I? Finally, it was Stryker that said, why don't you come to Kiel and talk to our engineers? And I went to Kiel and talked to the engineers. They're like, well, there is no reason we can't do that. Let's start working on this, right? And that's where we started talking about retrograde nails the first time. We started talking about, having disc locks that weren't straight across in a tibial nail and didn't aim for the artery. All that stuff was just basic common sense in trying to improve things. And then once you get started in that, you have avenues to sort of bring other visions to life. And it's the same thing with research, right? Every single paper that I've ever done came from a patient question. It wasn't, I was interested in publishing an article on X, Y, or Z. It was, I didn't know how far down the radial neck I could go safely when I'm fixing a radial head. Did a study. I can't figure out how to get these distal tibias nailed. We did a study. So all of the studies that we've done have been patient-based questions. You won't see a lot in my career around things that don't directly impact surgical technique or patients, because that's what I'm interested in. So I think that's the goal, right? So anything you do that promotes that goal of helping people anywhere, it does. It makes you feel good at the end of the day.
Paul, I like to help people too. Can I ask you about mentoring? Mo Bandari and Yelena Bogdan were two people that you come across early on in their careers. And we've been very fortunate they've been guests on our podcast. How do you pick the future superstars? How do you choose who to support and who not to? Because I imagine you must get asked for mentoring career advice all the time.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the answer is you don't pick it, they pick it. So, I can give you those two as great examples, right? So Mo, I did a randomized trial as a resident that went into my attendingship of like nail versus X-Fix, right? Because we didn't know what the best thing to do was. And Mo, when he was I think he was a third year resident at the time, like got in touch with me somehow and said, hey, we're looking to do, to combine some data, right? Like this was probably the first orthopedic meta-analysis or attempt at it, because Mo is innovative in his thinking. And can I get your data? I said, well, yeah, sure. I'm happy to share whatever I have. Like, what are you trying to do? Blah, blah, blah. And we sort of said, well, maybe we'll meet at the academy meeting. And he came up to me as a 3 at the academy. We spent a whole bunch of time talking when he was a PGY 3 at Hamilton. I was a very junior, attending. I'm not a lot older than he is because I was just in practice, but I had been lucky and published some stuff and been on some courses. So sort of he knew who I was. And that mentoring relationship, goes both ways, like all good ones do. And, I sort of taught him about surgery and the way surgeons think, in a way that he hadn't yet been exposed to. And then, you fast forward, we did some projects together and, I actually wanted to bring him on at BU. So when he was about to go into his fellowship, he spent a day with me because we were going to try to bring him to BU to be sort of half research, half half surgery. We spent an awesome day, doing cases, and it was a lot of fun. And I've had him to my house here. I'm at the beach house now. He's been down here, and he's a really collegial, strong thinker who takes opportunity and runs with it. So he's someone I introduced to someone else probably, and who knows how his meteoric rise started, but it was all based on him. It wasn't based on me. As a mentor, you really are there to provide some direction, maybe provide opportunity. And then the people who aren't going to succeed and aren't going to be the superstars, they just drop out. But they've been given the same opportunity and the same options, right? It's what you do with it that matters, right? This is the whole thing about nepotism also, right? Well, you give this person a job. Well, if you give them a permanent job, that's nepotism. If you give them a shot and they have to prove themselves, that's an opportunity. And, I was given that, for me, those people were people like Roy Sanders, right? Like Roy, who is, consummate surgeon and an awesome guy, met me when I was a resident. I had been lucky enough to actually been teaching some courses as a resident because I think I was like sort of the trauma attending at my hospital. So I got invited to teach at a course. I don't know that they actually realized I was a resident when they invited me, but that was fine because it was like a speed course. And I was very happy to go. And I met Roy and some other people sort of senior to me who took a liking to me. And, I remember Roy, gave me an opportunity to be on a committee. I had no idea why. And, I took that opportunity, I ran with it. And every opportunity I was given, I hit a triple or a home run and tried very hard to do a good job. And the more things you do well, the more people get to know you. The harder you work, the more people get to know you. And the more honest you are, the more people will give you those opportunities. And you give credit where credit's due. So whenever I work with people, it's not about me. I've done nothing alone, like zero, right? So Mo is one of those people who I gave him a little bit of knowledge and a little bit of opportunity and a little bit of benefit of a few years more experience that he didn't have. And he did all the rest. To me, that's just a collegial relationship. And Yelena's no different, right? Like Yelena wanted to be in the opera room. She wanted to be the best. That was very clear from day one. She would argue points. She would read stuff and bring things back. And there's nothing I love more than someone who challenges me. So she certainly does that to anybody, right?
Anybody.
And she, made it very clear what her goals were, that she wanted to get ahead. So I gave her opportunity. She hit a home run. I gave her another opportunity. She hit a home run. No matter what you ask her to do, she's going to come through. So, you're not choosing and saying, oh, I can see in her me, or I can see in her these certain qualities. Yeah. Really about uniformly giving everybody opportunity, right? You don't ever want to, I never cut someone out before giving them the opportunity, right? It doesn't matter how they come across, doesn't matter who they are. You always just completely open to opportunity. And then people will self-select, right? Yeah. They'll succeed or they won't. When they succeed, they get more opportunity. They get more credit. You write a stronger letter, right? So, I think mentoring is more about giving people the opportunity and the rope and letting them either lasso something or hang themselves.
Mo tells that, I think the 24 hours Mo spent with you, he tells it slightly differently. He told us in episode 14 of the podcast how you only let him sleep for 2 hours out of 24. You broke him.
I gave him like more sleep than you need.
That's an opportunity.
He got 2 hours. I dropped him off at the hotel, drove home, slept less, drove back, picked him up. Right? Yeah. I had transit time too.
Yeah, what's he complaining about? Do you find that you're getting better at spotting the winners early on? Do you find it, or is it still kind of sporadic?
Yeah, I think. Maybe I have a character flaw, but I think it's still sporadic for me. I mean, there are some people who come in and make a great first impression. Like what you see is in medical students and in residents, you see a little bit of what have they been exposed to already. Yeah. So, if your mom was an orthopedic surgeon, you're going to have a different approach and you think differently and you've been sort of trained to do so. And when, your first interaction with that person, they're going to come across better than, if your mom is a secretary and you're the first person to go through college. You don't have the same polish, you don't have the same approach. So what I've learned over time is it's not the first meeting that matters. I think the first thing that I see is the response to the first meeting. That's the first sort of clue for me. So you have a meeting, you say, here's what I want you to do. And then it's up to them to do it. So, the home runs are going to be within a week. You'll get, so I usually tell people, well, that's an interesting question. Here's what we're going to look at. Why don't you do a literature search? Tell me what you think about it, right? Because
that's a good one.
Have to train, the goal is not to train people to be monkeys. The goal is to train people to be surgeons. So you've got to make them think early. And, Socratic method, all of those things I strongly believe in. So you tell them, here's what we're going to look at. Why don't you do a literature search? Tell me what you think. Get back to me. And, 50% of people drop out at that level. Like they just don't get back to you because they're not looking to learn. They're not looking to innovate. They're not looking to think. What they're looking for is to put something on their CV. And I'm not going to give them that. Right.
Or they want you to tell them the answer without them having to look it up.
Yeah, no, they won't get the answer. They won't get the answer until they look it up. Right. Yeah. So they've got to come back with something. And now you've got engagement, right? You've got someone who's got skin in the game. They've now put some work into it. Now you meet with them, you sit down, you talk about it. I have an intern now who, we're at that stage right now, right? Very good kid, smart as heck. They're all smarter than I am. And we're, he wanted to say, well, what can we look at? I said, well, I'm kind of interested in hind-foot fusion nails for non-fusions. He said, oh, what do you want to look at? I said, well, what do you want to look at? He said, well, I don't know anything about it. I said, okay, well, learn about it. Go read about it. So he did a literature search. He sent me a paragraph. Here's what I'm thinking. I modified that. I said, okay, well, think about this and think about that, right? Because he has no experience.
Yeah,
so he's going just from some, and that's what you want. So then I gave him the next step. So now he has sent me, 2 days ago, a new proposal with some more specific identifiers, right? I said, okay, perfect. Let's meet Monday, right? Because I have to titrate that a little more down again to think a little bit more. But in the end, I want people doing projects with me to own them. I want them to have gone through the thought process, the literature review, and own the project and understand why we're doing it. And smart people, if you have a good idea, you can get them to think in that direction, right? But you have to do it stepwise. You can't just say, go do this. The go do this doesn't work for people.
So the trainees coming, just moving on, the trainees coming through they're the same group of human beings. Human beings haven't changed, and the entry criteria into orthopedics aren't that different from what they were back in the day. So these are bright, extremely highly functioning people. And yet they do learn and they do think slightly differently, as every new generation coming through do. And a traditional response to that has been older generations saying, oh, the younger people today are all a bunch of losers, or they're all lazy, or whatever it is. But I think a lot of the problem is often the older people being unable to understand how the new guys are learning. Do you see, maybe either in yourself or in your colleagues, a difficulty in responding to that change in the way people learn?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, as a teacher, and teaching is another skill set. It's not something everybody is good at. And I think I agree with you. I've actually said a very similar thing in the past. Say, like, if I were born, 30 years later, what would I be looking like coming through this system? Because I wouldn't have been the same me as I was then. And I think that there's two parts to it. One, some of the things that you would associate with, current level residents are unacceptable, right? Some of the societal expectations that they have from being alive in the time frame that they're alive are incompatible with the practice of medicine, and they need to be removed.
Give us a for instance.
Yeah, it's not their problem.
Okay.
Right. So there's an entire generation of everything is someone else's problem. Now, obviously, anything I say is not specifically assigned to an individual, and there's lots of outliers. But as a rule, right, we've gotten to the point where to be an expert, all you have to do is have an opinion and no data. Right. So you can be an influencer by just being a loudmouth. In the past, if you're a loudmouth, someone punched you in the face, or you had to back it up, right? Or you had to back it up, and if you couldn't, you got punched in the face. And that was a pretty good system, right? Someone's blah, 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 blah. Just fucking prove it, right? If you can't prove
it's a robust method.
Just shut up, right? Now that doesn't happen because you've got a whole bunch of the entire social media, which is great for some things, right? It's a community. It's wonderful for people for certain areas, but it's wonderful in the area of medicine if used correctly. But the idea that I think it, therefore, it's, my opinion is as valuable as yours is simply incorrect. Yeah. So that's one of the things that has to be removed. The fact that, that opinions matter without the backup of data. So early on, we make our residents think about that. Like, why are you doing that? What did you read that said do it, and explain it to me, right? I don't care if it's a textbook, it's a chapter, it's an article, it's a review article, but they've got to read something, right? To understand that, we're not reinventing the wheel with every single distal radius fracture. Like, just a few people have seen these before. So that's one of the areas that, that we remove from the residents pretty quickly. And not all of them come in that way. And some of them are really fact-based and evidence-based, and they learn it in medical school to a degree. But as a generation, every opinion is equal, is tactically and structurally incorrect for the field of medicine. On the other hand, they're much more resourceful than I was as a resident. Like, when I was a resident, I had to go to the librarian to ask her to help me to find these articles and then Xerox them and then bring them home and read them, right? And these guys are so industrious and quick in their ability to find information that they can do a lot of things that I never could do at that age. And the trick is identifying what things should remain as part of training and what areas we can exploit to make training better. Right. And that's the trick. And I would say it is hard for me. I teach people differently. I teach different residents differently. I was just explaining this. I have a resident who now works, her name is Jody. She works in New York in peds. And She was just given the best teacher award at a large program in New York, like in her second year of practice. Like, she's absolutely devoted person to her patients. She was like that as a resident. She was Elena's year. Like that year of residence was just like, you couldn't find a better year. And just like Elena, she's devoted to the field and to her patients. She'll email and call with sort of philosophical questions, because we had these discussions when she was a resident, and she had a problem with a resident. She's trying to figure out, like, how do I get this resident where I want to get them? And I sort of gave her my theory of residence. So there's sort of there's three types of people in residency. The first one is the best one to have, right? They want to be the best they can be because they care about what happens to the person they're taking care of, like the truly altruistic, hardworking person, right? They're perfect. All I have to do to say to them, so that would be Elena. If I said to Elena, like, I think your cast could have been a little longer, like, you could see 5 minutes of stress of how she's thinking, how could she make such an awful mistake, right? And you wouldn't have to say anything more, because that's going to get self-corrected, immediately.
It's done
right?
forever.
The second kind of resident who's acceptable and you can train them, but they become arthroscopists and cash carriers. But the ones who they want to be great, right? They want to be great, but they want to do it based on pride, not based on altruism. So you can give them constructive criticism, and if they believe it'll make them better in other people's eyes, they're going to self-correct. But if it's something that's not going to matter to the external world, it's going to matter only to that one patient, they're not going to self-correct. So you can get them to be very good technical surgeons for things that are on an x-ray, right? Because they want their x-rays to be perfect. But they may not pay attention to the soft tissue, right? So, that's the second type, is the pride-based. And you can mostly get them where you want them to go, but they're the ones at risk when they get into practice of doing unethical things.
Of drifting back into that behavior.
Yeah. The third one, which is the one that is the most dangerous, is basically someone who has no pride and doesn't care. Because, the only motivation for them is fear. So you can create an acceptable resident from that personality, and you can train them in rote ways to do the right thing. And they can come out acceptable and safe. But you also have to drive into them the concept of risk and the benefit to them of doing the right thing. Yeah. So those types of residents, I talk oftentimes about malpractice. I talk oftentimes about losing your house. And if my residents are listening at all, they probably won't want to hear that when I say it the next time. But those residents, they come out with the thought that, well, you got to do the right thing or it's going to hurt you, because they're only self-motivated. And, I would say, 80% of my residents are in that first category, and a very, very few are in that last category. And there's a couple in the middle, but in being a teacher, you have to understand how people learn and what's going to motivate them. Right? You can't scream at everybody. There are some people, if you scream at them, it just shuts them down, and they're not going to actually learn from the experience. Right. And we do a little thing with mentoring. We do personality testing in our program. And it's interesting. There's some diversity, not as much as you'd think, in the way that people's personality profiles come out. But there are ones that are very different. Like, for instance, I know this is shocking. I have an interpersonal sensitivity score of like 2.
Is this out of 100?
Out of 100.
Out of 100. It explains a lot, I know, right? And it's interesting because you think, well, gee, that means he's not empathetic, but I'm actually highly empathetic. What it actually means is I value the message more than the delivery. So when I was a resident and someone screamed at me and said, what, blah, 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 I didn't care that they were screaming at me. I cared to figure out what I had done that I could do better, right? It just didn't bother me. It just naturally didn't bother me. It wasn't like I had to develop a thick skin. It's just the way that I am. Whereas though other people, if you do that, they can't hear the message at all, right? And so that was a challenge for me, because I always treated people like the way I wanted to be treated. So if someone made a mistake, I would just say, hey, this is completely wrong. What are you thinking? And it was highly insulting, right? Whereas though I never meant it to be highly insulting, and it took me probably 10 years to learn that lesson. But, and then with personality mentoring, like, that lesson can get taught early. Elena is a perfect example. We actually published a paper on this. Our scores on these things are pretty close together. Her interpersonal sensitivity score is like right in the toilet with mine. And at one point, like, I had to pull her aside and said, look, some of the juniors are like, they're not happy with how you're treating them. And she was shocked by this, which is the exact same thing I would have been when I was younger. But she was shocked because she wasn't doing anything in her mind that was rude, and she wasn't being mean. She was being direct. And I had to explain to her all this stuff. And then she was able to self-correct that as a resident, whereas though it took me 10 years of attendingship to do that. Right. So I think that you have to understand how people learn and try to match where they learn, but it's not a one-way street. There has to be a commensurate activity on the opposite side to try to bend a little bit to sort of what experienced people believe is important in the field. So it's a two-way street.
So if you were giving advice to young mentors, people taking on mentees, what would your sort of killer advice be to those guys?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to set a good example, right? So I think 80% of our mentorship of our residents is actually set by what we do, not by what we say or tell them to do.
Yeah.
So if you say, hip dislocations need to be reduced in the OR, it's better for the patient, you better show up when there's a hip dislocation at 2 a.m, right? So I tell my residents, look, I think we should have 0 errors in the hospital. And I think that the only people who can make errors are the attendings. Like, you guys should never make an error. It's not that you need to be perfect. It's you need to know when you're perfect. So if your level of confidence is not 100% in a decision, you bump it up. Yeah. And ultimately, if it's a terrible trauma, whether I'm on call or not, it's 2 a.m, you call me. And I'll give you my best advice. And that's the best that we can do, because there's no one around that knows more than I do, at least at our place at the moment at 2 a.m. So, that's the end point. But that should always be the end point. It should always be the end point of what's best for the patient. And if you walk that walk, the residents tend to walk it with you, right? But you can't ask the residents to walk a path. You're walking on a nice gold-plated, yellow brick road to your castle. You can't ask them to run through the fire in the forest. It's just, it's ridiculous. Yep. So yep. I think most of mentoring is by example, and you have to have people who influence you in that way. And I've had a ton of those people who have set those examples, and I tried to mimic those examples. Yeah. And I think that, that's probably the main thing in mentoring. And then after that, it's really trying to understand what they need, not what you want to tell them. So And there's a lot of data about mentoring, and there's a nice AAOS publication about mentoring that was written. And personality has something to do with it, but in fact, I think anybody can mentor anybody, as long as the person mentoring is willing to listen and try to give good advice that's not what they think the person should do, but helping them to get to where they want to go.
Totally agree.
Can I ask about research, if you don't mind? So a lot of orthopedic research. So traditional orthopedic research has been, we retrospectively reviewed our last 100 of these, and they were great. You should do that too. It's often not particularly meaningful or transferable, but there's certainly been an evolution to these large-scale kind of collaborative multi-center trials. I was just wondering if you could tell us about your involvement, because you've been on the executive committees for Sprint, Faith, Trust, and Flow.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a lot of value in all of the literature we have. So I think people discount case series a little too quickly. I learned a lot when I was training, from case series. And I think negative case series have more value than positive case series. For sure. As well. Because learning what not to do is important. And we have a bad publication bias about keeping those out of the literature. And I think that's getting somewhat corrected, but it is important to see things that don't work right. I'll give you my favorite negative case. You won't find this publication because it got rejected, and I'll tell you who rejected it and why, and the level of disdain I have for the individual. So
I'm intrigued now.
This isn't making me say something stupid. I'm quite proud to say it. But way back when, there was an editor of JBJS, and we'll give you the name. But when I was a resident, so you can figure the timing. And we had a plastics group at our place that was doing these things called sure close. It's kind of like the dermaclose now. You'd put a needle on one side of the skin, intradermal, and on the other side, there was this gripper thing, and you could tension it. Yeah. And there was one case where they had, in general, to publish it, they did it on a scalp, and they showed like the blood supply, and it was in their advertisement for this device. And our plastics guy said, "Wow, this is great." So they put it on like 5 3B tibias that, all of whom failed and got infected, right? Because you can't stretch skin over. Yeah. Nothing makes no sense if you don't have a good bed. And I said, "Why do you guys keep doing this?" They said, "Well, it's got really good data." And they showed me like this, this stupid stuff that not in bone. So I wrote up this case series of sure close device, 5 failures, and I submitted it to JBJS. And the letter I got back was, the quote in it was, "Poor judgment is not generally rewarded by documentation in the journal." That's the exact quote.
Holy moly.
It's the exact quote that I got back. So I kind of lost it, and I wrote a 3-page letter back to the editor at that time, and I cut out, because we didn't have a lot of technology, so I literally cut the ad out of because this thing was being advertised in JBJS.
Yeah.
So I stuck it on there, I pasted it, taped it to the paper, and
Furiously.
It wasn't sure if I was a serial killer or a surgeon when he got this note, because I had zero self-control, right? So this was like the most flaming note you would ever send to someone. But basically, it said, look, you're advertising this, you're showing data that doesn't apply to orthopedics, and people in my hospital have done it and hurt 5 patients. It's your obligation to show that this doesn't work. And that didn't go. Surprisingly, he didn't just say, I agree with you. I was shocked when it still didn't get published. And then my next 50 articles to JBJS were rejected, probably without being sent out for appraisal. I have no articles in JBJS at the beginning of my career because of this fight that I had with this editor.
Did you get a reply to that letter, to your 3-page letter?
No.
I
didn't get it.
And you imagine you've met this individual at the academy since.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So actually the final time I saw was when that person finally retired from the job. And I don't know how clean the retirement was or what it was, but I actually ended up sitting next to him at the AOA, and I leaned over, I said, hey, congratulations on your retirement. And that was the end of the conversation.
You can't say, yeah.
I felt pretty good about that. It was like 25 years later, but it felt I don't forget things very easily.
No, it's very decent of you. I would have pulled out the 3-page letter and pulled it on the table.
Yeah, slammed it on the table.
I got a funny story about that. So I did do that. I did do that. So I'll tell you that. So Bob Leach, if you think I've succeeded in my career, Bob Leach, I don't know that anything the guy hasn't done, right? And he was the chairman at BU and still involved with our program a little bit, and still gives me advice. And he's like a sage guy, right? Like he's done everything, been everywhere, innovated, and he's just a fantastic guy. And when I applied to residency at BU, when I was a medical student, at that time you would send a card like requesting a paper application. So in literal terms, the only thing BU had was my name and address. And the letter I got back was, we're sorry, we can't offer you an application at this time. Like I got vetoed based on my name and address, right? And I was so pissed, right? I said, son of a bitch, I'm going to save this letter. I'm going to shove this up this guy's ass one day. And I saved the letter. No shit. I saved the letter, right? It's in like this file, right? So then fast forward, 20 years, and Tom Einhorn, who's an awesome guy, also recruits me to come to BU, and I come to BU, and Bob Leach is coming to grand rounds, right? And I'm just like, honestly, an honor to meet the guy, right? And it sort of faded away from my mind. And then somehow, like when I met him, it all flashed back, right?
Yeah.
I said, oh my God. So I went and I looked for the letter, right? It took me like 2 weeks to find, going through all my old crap, and I found the letter. So I went to grand rounds like the next week, and I've got this huge smile on my face. And people are like, what is wrong? He never smiles. Like, what's wrong with this guy? I wrote to Dr. Leach before. I said, Dr. Leach, I gotta show you something. He looked up, and just for the look on my face, he goes, this isn't going to be good. I said, 25 years ago, I swore I would show this to you and say you were wrong. And I gave it to him, and he looked at it and he went, I was wrong. Didn't phase him a bit, but it's funny the way you think, right? Like you want to prove yourself.
That's closure. That's closure.
But it's crazy, like not even to get an application. I mean, a form.
Well, there was a limited number of applications. They probably just, I don't know, came in after someone else. I mean, I'm sure it was, had nothing to do with Bob Leach. He didn't look at these. It was some clerical thing, like, we gave up enough in New York already or something. I don't know,
but that must have been vindication and a half.
Yeah, well, so Bob went from like not looking at my application, not giving me an application, to being, truly like a supporter of my career and a real mentor to me. So anybody can be anything.
Reeling it back into research, how do you? So you've got your single center studies at one end, and you've got your big multi-center RCTs on the other. How do you choose? And I know there's a textbook answer to this, but how do you decide what is the thing that demands an RCT? Because we all know that not everything suits that, but what does?
Yeah. I think impact is what determines that. So there are problems that are not big enough problems to deserve an RCT, right? There are problems that are very impactful that should be proven without a shadow of a doubt. So I think it all comes down to risk benefit, again, back to what's important to patient. And there are some things that you just shouldn't logically shouldn't randomize, right? RCTs are expensive to run. They require a lot of effort. You've got to have something that, that makes sense, but you can't do something that doesn't make sense. So who's going to sign up for the 5 millimeter of step off in your acetabulum versus anatomic study, right? Like, is anyone signing up for that? Like, we know the answer to that. So I think studies need to be done where there's substantial data that is in controversy with itself, right? So, the flow study is a good example. That I didn't initiate that study. That was initiated by others, but there was some good work done in animals and others that, that maybe soap would be good. There was some contradicting data. So, well, this is an important question. Infection in open fractures is an important problem. So it comes from, the effect on the patient is dramatic. It's an important problem. If we can lessen that dramatic impact, negative impact on a patient, we should do that. And this is one avenue where maybe we could do it. And we don't know the right answer based on small data. So you do a bigger study to get the actual answer. So that's like a really good example of one that to me makes a lot of sense, right? And there's an answer. Like, don't use it. And that's helpful. Other large studies are not as helpful when they don't answer a very important question. Like, the SPRINT study, which, I think adds to the literature, a little bit, but what it really added to was our ability to get answers. The importance of the SPRINT study was actually its accomplishment, not the finding. And if you look carefully at the SPRINT data, the data actually came down to broken interlock screws, and a decision we made at the steering committee level to say, well, that's similar to a dynamization. But otherwise, if you look at open fractures, there might be a small benefit across the board to unream nails. I still do that. And in closed fractures, probably reaming makes sense to get in bigger interlock screws. The findings are not dramatic. They're not having a huge effect on patient care, but it had a huge effect on our field of orthopedic trauma and saying we can do it. Like, we can initiate and complete a large study and get enough data to definitively answer a question. But the question now is, what do you fund? Well, you fund things that have the best possibility of having important impact on patients.
One of the things
One of
the things that struck me, though, about these big RCTs is because the data is collected so meticulously and so as completely as it possibly can, you get this kind of this sort of microclimate of other studies that come out of it, that fall out of it. And actually, of the thing that SPRINT gave us was that actually, if a tibial fracture doesn't seem to be uniting at 4 to 6 months, hey, sit tight, it might yet heal. And that was news, right?
Well, it wasn't.
That may not be news to you, but
that was part of the question. It was an interesting phone call that we had when we first were organizing it. So Roy Sanders and I had both published on unreamed nails and said that the clinical picture precedes the radiographs and weren't operating early on them, and they were all healing. And when we did SPRINT, we wanted to have a proscription against secondary intervention for 9 months, because that was what we had, both of our papers had sort of shown. And there was someone on the call that literally said the words, well, Paul, that's ridiculous. We all know the ream nails are going to do better. I said, what are you doing on this call?
Yeah, equipoise.
Yeah, that's right.
If you don't actually believe in the study, you're actually willing to hurt half of your pet. Like, you got to go. Yeah. You got to. I don't know who you are, but it was no Zoom then. I said, I don't know who you are, but you got to go. and we settled on 6 months, but that was a discussion, right? There was a large group of people who thought 3 months was enough, and that was a really carefully moderated discussion by Gord Guyot and Mo Bandari and the steering committee with Emil Shemitz and myself. But that's how you get to these answers. But it really told us we can do the study, right? Yeah. So now we know that we can arm up and do it. And now you look at how far that's come to, $120 million of funding or more to the METRC group, doing some really great large studies. Now there's some pluses to that, because the data that we get from that is just, you could never do it any other way. And there are some findings that'll come out, the Vanco study, right, showing a lower rate of infection for periarticular fractures. That's not new either. I've been using Vanco paste for 15 years almost. But we wouldn't be able to, at my center, say our infection rate's really low, so you should do this. Maybe it's something else that brought that about. Maybe I'm just a liar. Maybe I'm just lying about it. So you need to have these larger data sets to look at questions that are impactful. And most of those questions, unfortunately, are really around dichotomous outcomes. They're not around continuous outcomes, right? It's not what's your range of motion.
It's either or.
Do you have a catastrophic problem? And whenever you get into that realm, now you're dealing with, much larger magnification of the data necessary to comfortably get to that area without being unstable. Because, you look at, for instance, instability of dichotomous outcomes. And a lot of people have looked at this in Canada, and we've looked at it as well in trauma. Half a standard deviation of patients, or half of an outcomes of an arm of a patient, will actually switch studies from significant to insignificant a lot of times. Yeah. So you need a lot of patients to have a stable finding that will impact patients. And that's where we are now with those types of things. So when you're looking at open fractures, infections, maybe compartment syndromes, things like that need these very large trials. Yeah. And the reason they reach that point to me is the outcome is really impactful to those patients. So it's a real patient problem that's important. And it's a problem that we can't get adequate data on without doing it in this way. There's also a lot of things I don't think you need to study. And, there are a lot of large scale studies I don't join because I just don't think there's a possibility of the effort equaling an outcome that would change practice in a meaningful way. And then there's technique things, right? Because, when you get these large scale studies, there's a lot that goes into it. They become very generalizable, but they're not necessarily specific to you. So not everybody can look at the tables in the back of Lauderdale's book and say, this is how my patients do, because not everybody gets the reductions he got. There are also expert-based trials that I think are very important. So when you get to people who are really master technicians, and they publish data that in sometimes people just don't believe the data when it comes out. I tend to trust people a little more when they publish stuff. I think they're putting themselves out there, and I think that it's mostly true. But you see someone do something in a really elegant way. Like, the best example would be Roy Sanders' paper on calcaneus fractures. He literally showed his learning curve, and it took him a while to get as good as, I'm sure he continued that curve because he's phenomenal. But it wasn't his first 10 cases that were great. Yeah. And our goal really has to be so that everybody's first 10 cases are great. So Roy has to find a way to say, here's what I learned in a paper, so that now when I do that the first time, I'm closer up to the top of that learning curve.
I don't start at the bottom.
That stuff is not randomized. That stuff is, completely separate. Surgical technique and innovation is a completely separate area than large-scale studies. And I think both of them have tremendous value.
Yeah, well put. The one thing about the large-scale studies, though, is that it really highlights the importance of relationships in an academic career.
Yeah, I mean, that's like I said at the beginning, we do nothing alone, right? There's literally nothing I've done in my career where I feel like I'm the only one who had something to do with it. Probably half of the ideas that I've had have been spurred by something someone else said that maybe I didn't remember, that I didn't steal, but, I took the next step on something. And, in that area of community, that in orthopedic trauma, I think is stronger than in any other subspecialty. I really believe that. I mean, I remember when I was a PGY4 and I was going to the OTA to present a paper that I did with someone from another hospital. And, in those days, our academic allowance was I had to pay to go to the meeting myself and take vacation time. Right. So that's how I got to the meeting.
Very, very generous.
And, it was very generous. And I was, I really wanted to learn stuff. And I remember specifically, I was standing outside. We used to have these labs, these bioskills labs. Tony Russell, I don't know if you know Tony, but he's like a salt. What a guy. You should get him on the podcast. Tony was teaching a course, he's teaching one of these labs, and I have no money, right? I barely could get the airfare to go. I had to travel and then get on a Greyhound and then get on a horse. And then, I was on a turtle for a while. I finally got to the meeting, and I'm outside this room, my ear up against the door, just trying to get tidbits of information, through the door. And then the door swings open. I near had a freaking heart attack.
Busted, right?
Oh,
Busted.
No, the course police are coming. I'm going to get thrown out. I'm going to get back on my turtle, right? And it's Tony Russell. He's like, well, who are you? I said, no, I'm nobody. I'm nobody. He said, no, hold on. Where are you going? I said, he said, who are you? What do you, what's going on? I said, and then I felt like, I was caught. Now I'm in the principal's office, and I got to fess up, right? So I put on my most, I'm so sorry face and said, I'm really sorry. I mean, I'm a fourth-year resident. I'm from New York. I couldn't afford to do anything. I was just trying to listen. And guess he goes, well, buddy, come on in. He walked me in the course. Someone's like, where's his ticket? He goes, I'm his ticket. Sticks me at a table and teaches me. right? And like, I never forgot that. That made a huge impact on me. And things like that would happen all the time in our field. Like the first OTA meeting I went to, I had no place to sit. I didn't know anybody. Fred Behrens and Dave Helfet said, "Hey, you're coming to New York. Why don't you come sit with us?" These guys were like president of the society. And it's like that, I think, throughout our field that people really support the people starting out. And if you put the work in and do the work, there's almost immediate acceptance. And I think that level of community is huge. I mean, Tony Russell and I ended up designing a plating system together 15 or 20 years after that.
Yeah.
We didn't see him for a long time. And then we got back in touch. And, I told him, of course, I told him that story. He's like, "I don't remember that at all." I was like, "Right, well, you wouldn't. But I remember every minute of it." Yeah. Right. And you like to be in a position, maybe there's someone out there that I've done something for that'll come up and say, "Hey, you really helped me," that I won't remember. Like, that'd be great. Right. That would make me very happy.
He's clearly made an indelible impact. And as you have as Mo Bandari told us, he's got so many stories about you, have so many people.
Is there one study that you'd love to do? What's the study if you could do it and you could get funding for it, that would be your dream?
Yeah, I don't know. I think that I've been working a bit with Jay Parvizi and the FDA, and what I see a number of real challenges in our profession now. One is the acquisition of real world data, and the second is in education, and we're trying to do some things in both of those areas. Innovation to come to market in the United States requires getting through the FDA, and the FDA is a very regimented government agency. Who, everyone I've talked to there really means well and wants to do good, but they're stuck within a structure that has not really kept up well with technology.
Yeah.
So they have these divisions within the FDA that have to work together, and those things are still being worked out, right? And I think that some of the areas that I would like to understand better are not things that I could randomize. There are things that would take too many like, you're not going to randomize when will I do a flap for a 3B tibia.
Yeah.
Right? It's not a randomizable act, no. Right? It's not randomizable to say, when will I go to the operating room with a 17-year-old with a displaced femoral neck?
Yeah.
So those are the challenges that to me are the ones I'm most interested in, and trying to get registries that are real world data that could be used in a more extensive way to bring innovation to market that could really help people. That to me is the thing that's the golden apple to me, because then you can bring things to market based on safety profiles, right? Because you don't want to ever hurt someone. So you can do small pilot studies to say this is safe to bring to market. And then see how it does in post-market surveillance in large, detailed registry data in these complex arenas, and actually figure out over time what works. And then it's a moving target. As things get released, they get checked against their competitors in other areas. And you could do that, without setting up a randomized trial. Because one of the problems with a large-scale randomized trial is it takes 8 years.
Yeah.
And if I were to do, for instance, an implant study, I code an implant. By the time I finish the randomized trial, there's something new that may be better.
Yeah.
Right. But if you could use real world data with surveillance and get all of the patients into those things, that would to me be one of the ways in which we can improve faster and be a little bit more nimble in what we do.
That's right. Because the data,
that's a big one.
The data would reveal itself as it arose.
Yeah. Yeah. I think real world data and constant monitoring of outcomes is going to be, 50 years from now, it would be unimaginable that that's not what's happening, right?
Yeah.
Like people will think, because people will have on their phones, they'll be. I mean, we're trying to do some of this now, getting a bunch of outcome scores in a very, every 2 weeks, right, to develop recovery curves and see when someone falls off the curve, and trying to do with smart implants and stuff that will make real impact on not just the initial treatment, but on actual functional outcome, right? Because that's in trauma, that's where we're behind you guys in sports, right? We're a little bit behind in getting people back to the highest level of function, right? But to do that, we have to have more information. So, 50 years from now, you'll have an implant. It'll be in your glasses, your contact, your eye, your head, somewhere.
Your retina.
When you're walking around, you're going to know your fracture. Where is your healing of your fracture on a minute-to-minute basis compared to everybody else, right? Because it's all going to be implanted. And that's, we have to get to the future, but we got to start with some small steps now. And I think that the evaluation of real world data is one of those areas.
That's fascinating.
Can I take a slightly off beam a bit? So I went around. I spoke to a bunch of people ahead of this podcast to say, well, what should I ask Paul Tornetta? What should I ask him? What should I ask him? And a lot of people came in with things. So I'm going to hit you with some of those. I obviously asked Yelena, and she said, because one of the things that did come up, and you won't mind me saying this, is that Paul is a very polarizing character in the sense that a lot of people find him a little jarring when they first meet him. And Yelena said, I can tell you, I'm reading this out, I can tell you categorically that anyone who says he's a bad person is a total dick bag full of tiny dicks.
That's very eloquent.
Yeah, I'd like that on my gravestone, please.
But I've been there. I've never been subject to it, but I've been to the OTA many times, and I've seen the look in people's eyes. That guy in the blue suit and the gold buttons walks up to the microphone to ask a question, and they know that something's coming at them that they're going to have to field. And you ask your questions in a very direct, unapologetic manner, and it's always relevant. It's always absolutely on the money. And I guess the question coming out of it is, have you always been someone who challenges dogma, goes against the grain, and when something doesn't sound right to you, or challenging perceived truths?
Yeah. Short answer is absolutely I have, since I was like 5 years old. But I was trained. So my first mentor, we talk about mentors, like your first mentors are your parents, right? So I had, my mom was my actual mentor, and everything I learned about empathy and being a good person came from her. But she also taught me that if I didn't know something, I should ask. I should always feel free to ask, right? My presidential address at the OTA was really from her. It was called Question Everything. And that's the talk I give at all my graduation speeches. It's called Question Everything. And essentially, it's the way that I've thought throughout my entire life. You can look back at my medical school application, and my favorite professor, who I thought would give me like the best letter ever, who gave me a great letter, he thought, but at the end of it said, doesn't really respect authority. I was like, well, I'm not sure how that helped me. And it got brought up in one of my interviews. They said, one of your professors said, you don't really respect authority. Is that true? And I said, well, unfortunately, yeah, it's absolutely true. I respect knowledge. I respect accomplishment. But authority to me is something that only comes when someone else gives it to you. Like, the authority that's put over you, to me, means very little. And so I have always felt that way. And I did always question people. And like I said, my first 10 years in practice weren't smooth. That interpersonal sensitivity issue popped up a number of times. And I got beaten down for it and beat back. And I would argue with people, and there was a lot of, who does this guy think he is? And it wasn't that I thought I was special. It's that I knew what I knew. I knew what I didn't know. I had a high level of confidence in the things that I knew. I never argued about the things I wasn't sure about. But if I was sure, I was generally right. And people didn't like that attitude, that I could feel so confident about what I knew. In fact, that was another good example of one of the things that Roy and I did. He gave me an opportunity. I was on like this OKU for trauma, right? Realized like the youngest guy in the room. And at that point, we got together and reviewed everybody else's chapter. And he said something about, you got to do this, and then you do the fibula, and then otherwise you end up in varus. And I was like, and I literally, I also can't contain myself well, and I curse. I was like, what the fuck does that matter, right? And he's like my senior, and like I have a ton of respect for him, and it wasn't anything like that, right? Like I couldn't respect the guy more, but it was just my way of saying, I'm calling you out. I don't believe that at all. It doesn't make any sense. Here's why I don't think it. And he looked at me like, and I didn't know if it was going to be a fight, an argument, being thrown out, being fired. And he went, well, that's interesting. Huh. Right. Because he's also a guy like that, right? He's polarizing, and, but he wants his patients to do well. He's going to be the smartest guy in the room 90% of the time. He's not going to tell you that, but when he tells you something and he knows he's sure. You can trust him on that. Right. And he didn't mind that direct assault even a little bit. But many people, didn't have his inner strength, and that didn't serve me particularly well. But yeah, I've always been that way, right? Through residency. I could tell you stories about my residency that probably aren't good for this, but I got one of the hospitals tried to fire me and have me never come back. I had one hospital I rotated through, and when I left, they hung a doll with my name on it, like from the rafters in the ED, because These are all true stories I get because I wouldn't accept anything but what I thought was the right thing. And I held a lot of people accountable for things they didn't want to be accountable for. It didn't help me, but eventually, if you see past people like that to realize what their motivation is, you can accept them a little better, maybe.
But if you were now mentoring a young Tornetta, what would, and he's this hothead who's going around like being awesome, but also generating. What would you say to him? Would you say just keep going? This is awesome. You're going to make it, or would you?
No. I definitely made a lot of tactical errors and would not repeat those mistakes. And I certainly could have. I don't know that I would have ended up in a different place because I'm hard-headed, and when I wanted to do something, I just did it. And I've never done anything because someone wanted me to do it. I've always just done the things I thought were important, and I've also never cared very much about what people think of me unless I have a lot of respect for them. So when people don't like me, frankly, I don't care. Yeah. I honestly, deep down in my heart, really don't give a shit. So that makes it easy to take that kind of criticism. And the people who I care about, who I respect, don't feel that way about me because I don't think I deserve to be felt that way about, right? So I would change so many things as a junior person, not necessarily what I said or what I wanted to get done, but the manner in which I did it. I was a bull in a china shop, no doubt about it. And I try to train people not to be that way. The people who are like that tend to be passionate and, I'm not over it, by the way. Like it still happens every now and again.
You've got insight. You've got insight.
I still got that bull inside me, and there's a china shop everywhere I walk. But it is true that the more passionate you are about something, the more that shows up, and that can be good or bad. And the trick is to sort of to keep the bad down and try to approach it in a way that other people can deal with. But still accomplish the goal. So, I was a shitty politician, and now I'm just a bad politician.
Well, talking to politicians, that's a good segue into a question we want to ask you. Yeah. Whilst you're fired up, let's go.
One of the other questions that came up a lot in asking people, I spoke to some guys in Houston and Dallas because I fellowship there. One of the things that cropped up a lot was them asking your opinion on the state of trauma in general, in orthopedic trauma in the US at the moment. I mean, obviously, as Brits, we're kind of fascinated by your healthcare system, as I suppose you have a passing interest in ours because they're so different. But so this is not some smug thing. It's just we're interested to know what's going on. And
I think we're heading simultaneously in the right and wrong direction. So, the ABC Fellowship was fascinating for me. I visited a lot of places in the UK, and it was really interesting, and it is different. So I would say that in the US, we're heading in the right direction in that there's a larger sense of community among orthopedic traumatologists. There's more people in that community. There's less burnout at the busy level ones. There's enough workforce to manage things, and the research that's being done, I believe, tends to be patient-centered and important. So I think if you look at where we are in terms of important decisions, 5 years from now, we'll be making better decisions for 20% of the patients. Yeah. Whereas though in the past, a 5-year period might give you 3% of the patients, right? Yeah. So we're sort of tackling bigger things, and I think that's all really, really good. But that has brought about politics in research groups and hurt feelings and other things, because credit can never be distributed to everybody equally where maybe it should be, right? Mm. Like in our consortium, which is a much more loosely constructed consortium of people just want to do good work, and we're not funded mostly, and we just want to do good stuff. If you contribute, you're an equal author, right? There's not someone taking the lead on some of these, even if they put in more work, and then someone else will do it for the next study. And it's a very collegial group. And in some of the larger groups, there become hurt feelings, and there become, well, why is this person always getting this or that person? And I think those politics make it very hard for some people to contribute. And we sort of need to get to the point where, if someone's doing enough work to be a lead on something, they need to get the respect for doing that. And then the respect you get for doing your part is your part, and everybody should accept that. The part where I think we're getting worse is that we clearly have too many fellowships, too many fellows, and graduating too many people.
In trauma?
In trauma.
Right.
In trauma, you need to have a certain volume to stay good at what you do. And the learning curve is going to be, it's a certain number of cases. Maybe it's less for a technically gifted surgeon than one who's not, but there's a curve. It's never a flat line. Ideally, what I always tell my residents is your learning curve should be in the time you're in the operating room. It shouldn't be in the outcome. I look back at my x-rays when I was a resident and my acetabular fractures look like they do now. It's just that they took 10 times longer. I did one case for 28 hours, right? 28 freaking hours. I could do that case in 4 hours, 5 hours now, but it didn't have it right. I did it again. So, there's a learning curve to everything you do. But I think that when we put out too many people and now we start to have, small groups of surgeons with trauma trained people who want to do that one acetabulum that comes to their level 2 or their 3 a year, then we're getting away from centralizing care to be expert. And now we're instead of generalizing studies, we're generalizing care. And I think that's a deficit. So, that's something that will work its way out, I think, over time, because there's so much consolidation in groups that my hope is that most of these large groups will eventually become like little academic centers and expertise will pop up in those areas and maybe we'll get a little less of it. But I think that's the current challenge that we have right now. So, we have structural challenges and we have some sort of, personal challenges.
And you've also talked you've mentioned elsewhere the financial pressures on trauma surgeons to operate, because you're a big advocate of conservative management wherever possible.
Yeah, well, that gets onto my diatribe of, and people are sick of hearing it, but no one cares about non-operative care. And again, I would simply say you have a patient in front of you. The thing that matters is only one thing. It's that patient. Yeah. Now, I'm not a bad surgeon. I think I do good work. I operate on fewer humeral shaft fractures, distal radius fractures, calcaneal fractures, clavicle fractures than anybody that I know. I've been in the same place since 1998. I follow my patients until they're doing well. And I don't have a clinic full of unhappy people. So I'm not doing it wrong. Yeah. Right. And, so I think that we have a young group of people who are enthusiastic about operating, who have a different opportunity than what we had. When I came out, I couldn't stay afloat doing the surgery that had to be done because we didn't have enough people. Now we have too many people. So if you want to be a busy surgeon, you're going to have to either find a sideline, become a non-union surgeon, become a foot and ankle surgeon, and do other things besides trauma, or you're going to end up doing things that don't have to be done. And, the perfect example of that is sort of trying to find a balance in pelvic fractures, right? You have a lateral compression pelvic fracture, and the people who are senior, who know what they're doing, have been doing it a long time, following their patients till they do well, are operating on very few of them. Yeah. And then there's an entirely other group of people who are trying to figure out, like, how can I make this seem like it needs an operation? Well, maybe if I stand up on top and jump up and down on it, maybe then it won't look as good, and I can find a way to say, well, this required surgery, right? So there's these two wild ends of the spectrum, and there's a number of groups trying to figure out, like, what's the right balance. And I think that balance is not going to be a single line. That balance is going to be a spectrum where maybe I'm willing to take a little more risk with some mild malalignment because my experience tells me this is not going to be a problem. And someone else is saying, well, I think it's going to end up with malalignment. My risk for surgery is low. I'm going to operate on that. And that's a really good spectrum to have. The only problem is right now, individual surgeons are not taking that spectrum and giving it to where it belongs, which is the patient, right? So to me, I get a calcaneus fracture that's not markedly displaced or in a high-risk patient. That's a 45-minute conversation in clinic to go through the options of whether we should operate or not. And people don't want to spend the time to get to that answer. But, you two in that room with the same clavicle fracture might pick different treatments if given the data, right? For the humerus fracture, might pick different treatments. I split my, we do morning conference with the residents every day. And it's not uncommon that, when the case comes up where I'm like, I don't know whether it's right or wrong, it's going to be a patient conversation. I say, okay, who in the room wants surgery? And I can almost always get it to half.
Yeah, or less, right?
Right. If half your residents can't decide and they're being taught how to take care of these, it means there's not data to say which should be done. And there probably isn't going to be data because there's pros and cons that are different and they may be weighing them different. One person may say, I don't want an incision in surgery unless I have to have it. Another person might say, I want to get back to function as soon as I can. I'm willing to accept some risk to do that. And so I think that right now, the largest principal problem that we have is the loss of a patient-based approach in the younger generation of surgeons as they come out. I have faith in our field, though, and I think that most of those people, as they gain experience, become a little bit more patient-centric. Like, I think that's a growth that occurs over time. When that weight of responsibility hits you, right, that says you're responsible for this person, that's when that thought process becomes a lot more clear to you.
Yeah. One of the paradoxes for you is that you teach on the fellows course, and that's your course, but and yet you don't have your own fellow. And my understanding is that you prioritize your residency program. And you want that to be awesome and not have fellows diluting that.
Yeah, and for trauma, so I'm not as busy as shock trauma, right? I'm not as busy as Seattle. I mean, we have a small Northeast program. We have 2,500 trauma admits a year. We've been about the same, and I have a non-union practice and other things that I do. And in my opinion, taking a fellow would be bad for three reasons. One, I'm not sure if someone could put up with me entirely for a year, right? That's the biggest challenge.
100% Tornetta could be a bit much.
All Tornetta all the time. Yeah. That is not a selling.
That's a rich mixture.
So that's a problem. But I think that our volume is not one where they're going to do 100 acetabulums. So I think that we would come up a little bit short on the experiential part of training, not on the principal side, but on the experience side, we'd probably be a little short of some of the other programs. And then the other thing is the cases that they would want, that they would want to do are the ones that I would let them do on their own, right? Or the ones that I want to walk the residents through. So the primary reason I didn't take a fellow early on was I didn't want to dilute the resident experience. And now I think that we train too many. I wouldn't consider, even if I had a big place, I wouldn't have a fellow now. It's too many. But I think that, training residents to do good trauma work is very important. I have a number of residents, even in the last 5-8 years, who are taking care of pylons, plateaus, doing a lot of really complex work, who never had a trauma fellowship. Because they learn the principles, and then they go on their learning curve.
Can I ask, just change tack, understand you a little bit better. I'm quite curious. Are you a creature of habit? Do you have any routines, or is everything just different every day?
Yeah, no, nothing can be different any day. It's
has to be the same.
My head would explode. Yeah, no, I'm a creature of habit. I get up very early every day. Not only am I a creature of habit, but like of organization. Like the one time I left the house without my wallet, like it was 3 inches from where it belongs, right? Yeah. And I grabbed all the spots and then ran out of the house. And I came back to find the wallet. Literally, it was like 3 to 4 inches from where it belonged. And because it wasn't where my hand went, it didn't exist in my mind, and I left without my wallet. So I'm a creature of habit. I mean, I do early mornings. Weekends I'm up for the sunrise every single day. I'm a photographer, so I do a lot of pictures on the deck. My wife and I sit out on the deck. We have coffee, take pictures. And that's sort of my morning routine. I go to the hospital. Usually I leave at around 4:15 or so, do some work in the office. And then, the day is what it is. I think primarily the things I do most are early in the morning. And it's true, I haven't missed a day of workout. I haven't missed a workout in over 30 something years. So every single day I do something. I don't lift as much as I did. I lift 3 times a week now, but I do aerobics every day. So I used to run a lot. I've had a little hip problem, so now I do a little more elliptical and bike. But I literally haven't missed I'm an hour a day minimum every single day, even when I've had surgery. So like the days I've been up all night doing surgery, I drive home, I work out, I take a shower, I go back to work. I didn't sleep. And I've had a number of procedures myself, and I didn't miss a day of workout. Like
wow.
I scheduled and I counted the 24 hours, to make sure I didn't miss a day. So
you just don't want to break that chain.
Don't want to break the chains.
Yeah. But are you when your workout out of interest, where does it fit in? Is it at the end of the day when you're back from work?
It's wherever it fits. So right now, with the lockdown, which by the way, the lockdown was the greatest thing ever for me because I hate people. But me being isolated, just me, the two of us in the house, and like rarely having to leave and see other people except for patients was just great. Like now I could probably, do meetings for another 5 years now because I got all of my solo time in. But, it depends on what it is. Now, I have a gym in both houses. And so that was I learned that on the ABC Fellowship, actually. And when I went to the UK, they always put us up somewhere where there's a gym. I was like, wow, it's so much easier to work out when it's right here. So I went home that year and built a gym. I built an addition on my house with a gym in it. So I have stuff at both houses. And, if I'm traveling, typically it's at the end of the day I work out. When I get home, so I can sort of burn off the day and then settle down and get back to other stuff. And otherwise I work out at 2:30 in the morning if I'm traveling. So if I'm traveling, I know I'm not going to get to work out when I get somewhere. I do 2:30 to 3:30 and then head to the airport.
Wow.
That's an unreal ethic. Unreal.
That is unreal.
But it does also mean you can't be sleeping much.
I get more sleep now than I used to. We used to be a little busier. I used to cover 3 trauma rooms a week and be operating until very, very late. So there were many years where I probably did 4 hours on average a night. I do a little better now as the chair because I've had to give up a little bit of the clinical practice. So I do 2 trauma rooms a week and which is, gives me a little more time free. We used to do more weekend call than we currently do now. We spread it out a little bit more. So I probably get 5-6 hours on average. But if I don't get to sleep by like 10, then I'm up till 2 and I'm back up at 4. Like if I don't get to sleep by 10, I'm hosed. I can't get to sleep.
Everyone I know moans about how they don't have any time. And we spoke to Mo. I said, everyone moans about not having any time. And he said, we're just so time inefficient. When we have time, we don't use it properly. And he has actually changed the way he runs his week and the way he has meetings, etc. How do you manage your time? Because you're now your program director and your chair, along with all of the other stuff and your full-time surgeon.
So I'd say I'm a little less than a full-time surgeon now, which has been one change since I took the chair role. So I am a little less busy clinically. That makes it a little easier. But, even when I was busting my hump, with a full clinic all day and then 3 OR days and then meetings, you use the time that's available to you. I think that time management is about efficiency, not just about the efficiency of how you use the time in the day, but it's about how effective you are in the actions you're doing. So I won't try to edit a paper between cases because I need a block of time to do intellectual work. Like I need to be in a certain frame of mind. So I do most of my editing nights, weekends. Like when I was a resident, I used to go to the hospital 3 hours or 2 hours before, usually 2 hours before rounds. So I'd show up at like 4 o'clock and I had a private place in every hospital where I read for 2 hours. That's what I did every day as a resident. And that was great for me because it's completely focused time. So what I see as the error is inefficiently doing something. So spending 3 hours to do something you could have done in 20 minutes if you did it right. So the way I manage my time is to put things in the blocks that make the most sense. So between cases, I answer emails. I'm good at that. I get everything back to people. I say, okay, I'm going to review this. I don't try to review it. I say, I'm going to review it. I put it on my desktop in my to-do folder. But the to-do folder doesn't get approached until there's actually time that I can think and actively do something. So I need at least an hour and a half of block time to get something real done. And then once you get into that zone, you're extremely, efficient at it. So I think the biggest problem that people have with time management is doing the wrong thing at the wrong time.
Yeah, you're talking to me there. I mean, you've been amazingly responsive in all our email communications. I kind of send something, and then 5 seconds later, I've got a response. I'm like, oh gosh, I better reply to that now. And then
because at the end of the day, right, I need 3 hours to do real work.
Yeah.
And if at the end of the day my 300 emails are there, I've just lost the real
It kills
work.
you. Yeah.
So that's what. I mean, it's not that I'm that efficient. It's that I don't want to be behind, right? Because then I lose effective time later. So that's just an example.
I'm interested. I'm a residency program director, and I'm really interested in the work that you're doing in residence education with the academy. Could you tell us about that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. So, every step of the way, I've been trying to get a resident curriculum done. Like I tried to do it when I was with the AOA and the board wasn't on the same page. And, as a council on education chair, the one thing I really wanted to get done was to develop a unified resident curriculum through the academy, right? Because the subspecialty groups, they do a wonderful job in their area, but they can't do everything, right? Nobody can do everything, and the academy is sort of the obvious place where everybody comes together. And the board, the AAOS right now is very much in tune with those same thoughts, where everybody is it's just the timing is perfect. So for the past 2.5 years, we've been doing this resident education project, which is to design a resident curriculum, which is going to be a living document, that you can use on a phone, a tablet, a computer, with quizzes, with tests, with a ton of resources that you can link to, all the videos that the Academy has, chapters in books, PDFs. Walter Sclure has given us PDFs from primary journals, very, very altruistically. And that is going to get released soon. We're just coming to the completion stage, and that's going to be a living document. It's going to be updated every year with new things. So, it will, I hope, completely revolutionize resident education. It'll be the backbone. It doesn't teach surgical skills. The board will be getting into some of that as well, but this will teach the medical knowledge side in a way that no one has seen before. And it's literally, when I'm done with my career, I really expect to look back and say that this thing that I tried to do 5 different times and finally got in the right position with the right supporting cast. Again, you're never doing it yourself, right? Yeah. It's all the right people, tremendous editors. My co-editor, Carol Morris, was one of my old phenomenal girl. Just everybody was right. The staff at the Academy, the subspecialty groups who got involved, it was just an absolute huge team effort. And it'll be coming out soon and probably tweaked over a year. And, this time next year, it'll probably be rock solid, and it's going to change the face of education. I'm very excited about it.
I can't wait to see it. I mean, that
sounds amazing.
And we got a scoop as well. Got announced it here first, guys. So
it's going to be free. It's going to be free to all residents.
Right. Will it come as an app, or will it just be kind of an online resource that they go to?
It's an online resource, so it may develop into an app over time, like how we access it with single sign-on. But right now, you would just log into the website, and you can do it on in any format. And then you'd log in. They log in with their AAOS ID, and then they're in sort of their version of it. That shows what they've done, what they haven't done.
I can't wait to see that. I mean, that'll be your legacy along with all the other legacies.
Yeah.
Hopefully, see you at the OTA one year.
Yeah.
The sports guys allowed at the OTA?
No, they're not. No, they're not had it.
My wife is a renowned patellofemoral surgeon, Mio Tanaka. I'm not kidding.
Okay.
Oh, right.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That's your wife.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Yeah. In fact, I'm acknowledged in one of her papers at the fellows course. We have these 20 cadavers, right? And a normal spouse, when you're done with your work, wants to go have a drink or maybe go back to your room or something like that.
Yeah, get dinner.
Look now, my wife Miho Tanaka looked out at the cadavers and said, "What are you doing with those now?" I was like, "Well, nothing." She goes, "Well, can I use them?" I was like, "What do you want to do to our cadavers?" Right? And she's like, "There's 20 patellas in there. This is fantastic." So I went in and I had to talk to the people and say, "Can they stay here for another hour and a half?" And then Dan Horwitz and I became lab techs as she meticulously dissected out all of these things and took pictures and do this thing. It became a publication. That's awesome. Time use efficiency.
And you're named on it. See?
Well, it's sort of I'd like to thank Paul Tornetta, who took some of the pictures.
But doesn't
it's your inner sports guy.
Yeah, but this proves to you. This vindicates everything I've been saying about the patellofemoral joint. That even you.
Well, it's my best joke when I do graduations. I always put up and say, these are some of the myths. These are some of the problems, and I'll put up the myths, right? And I'll say, the ankle has to be fixed in dorsiflexion. Not true. Cubitus varus is only an appearance problem. Not true. Pylon fracture should be operated on early, right? Not true. And then the next line says all of sports medicine. Every single place I've been, people hit the floor.
It kills, right?
It kills.
What you don't realize is my soul is slowly dying inside. Listening to this. No, so in the UK we've got slightly different systems. So I do trauma as well. So we do trauma and sports.
Yeah.
But
I know.
It's too late, Cash. It's too late.
I've been absolutely roasted by PT3. I mean, I don't know where I go from here. I'm finished.
Only up, right?
That's right. Done, aren't we?
I think we're PT3 completed.
PT3. Have we missed anything out, Paul?
No, I don't think so. I think that the summary of my career is think about the patient.
Yeah.
Like that, it comes up in everything that you do. And if every single thing you do is think about the patient, be collegial, anyone can have the same career as anybody that they've admired.
Yeah. Amazing.
Pete, stick a fork in it. We're done. So we've done the big kahuna now. So now unless you go into the quantum realm or go back in time and get me John Charnley, I think with Pete, that's the end of the podcast. Thanks, everyone.